On WhatsApp, no one can see or hear your personal messages. Whether it's a voice call, message, or sending a password. To WhatsApp, it's all just this. So whether you're sharing the streaming password in the family chat or trading those late-night voice messages that could basically become a podcast, your personal messages stay between you, your friends, and your family. No one else. Not even us. WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality walking shoes, which might lead to another discovery.
40,000 steps, baby. Who's on top now, Karen?
You've taken the office step challenge a step too far. Don't worry, though. Sierra also has yoga gear. It might be a good place to find your zen. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
It is Monday, July 14th, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, the sports podcast over here at Slate. Back with you yet again, I'm Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I co-host Split Zone Duo. That's a college football podcast. This week on Hang Up, we'll talk about Wimbledon, and in particular the final on Sunday, and the budding, or no, already fully bloomed, I should say, rivalry between the sport's two great players going forward, Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner, the champion. The excellent tennis writer and author Giri Nathan will join us momentarily to talk about all of that. We'll talk about the team that's hosting the MLB All-Star Game this week, but doesn't have much to feel good about as it does. What's behind a disaster year for the Atlanta Braves? Ben is going to tell us, and we'll do a post-mortem on the first edition of the FIFA Club World Cup, which ended on Sunday with a victory 3-0 by Chelsea over PSG, which was just a few months removed, not even, from a Champions League victory. Soccer writer Henry Bushnell of Yahoo will stop by. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the biggest stories of the day in women's sports. Lindsay, how goes?
It goes so well. I spent the weekend. There's a big family reunion, but then I also got immersed in this Luca video drama. Did everyone see this? Where he made this like really awkward video to this streamer about not being able to attend this basketball event, and it went viral, and the streamer was like, actually, I told him to be that awkward. And now we don't know. Honestly, the original video is so great, and it makes me so mad that it might have been staged. Because it was so good. Like, it was so good. Like, he's like, okay, hope we hang out. Bye. Like, it's just... So anyways, this could be a whole hang-up segment. I honestly believe it, but this is how I spend my time.
Be nice if every awkward interaction I've ever had, someone came out publicly and said, "Oh, I told him to do that." He's normally so smooth.
Ben Lindbergh, how are you? Did you enjoy the celebrity softball game that was played on much. Saturday? Was it?
I had heard of some of the participants, in fact. But yeah, I'm enjoying my All-Star break like Jose Ramirez and Julio and other players. I'm taking the All-Star break off to rest up for the remainder of the season. I'm sure we would all be All-Star selections, of course, here at Hang Up and Listen.
That we would. Thank you, Ben Lindbergh, senior editor of The Ringer, co-host of Effectively Wild. Before we get into our business in full on this show, we do want to say thank you to our Slate Plus members for making this whole thing possible. Subscribing helps us make Hang Up and Listen. It also lets you get it ad-free, which is an excellent perk, and you get bonus segments. And we've got one of those live for Slate Plus members right now. It is about the specter of NCAA tournament expansion. That's basketball, the sports business idea that simply will not die. You can hear that episode right now as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen.
Back to Jannik Sinner takes his piece of Wimbledon history. What a wonderful match.
The ladies' singles final on Saturday at Wimbledon was truly brutal to watch as Iga Świątek picked apart American underdog Amanda Anisimova, delivering her an infamous double bagel, a win 6-0 and 6-0 in 2 sets, something that basically never happens in a Grand Slam final. The only other time in the Open era, stretching back to the late 60s, was at the 1988 French Open. We'll come back to that match at the end of this segment, I imagine, but it really did hurt to watch. The men's final on Sunday, which you just heard the end of, was a bit less dominant, but I think just as impressive on the winner's part. Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner yet again renewed what has already become one of the great rivalries in sports and still has tons of room to grow. 6 weeks or so after Alcaraz outlasted Sinner in an incredible final at Roland Garros, the two were back together, and Sinner got some revenge, winning in 4 sets to claim Wimbledon for the first time. I'm sure they'll go at it a bunch more times, but for now, that's a 4th slam title overall for the Italian, his first not on a hard court. Giri Nathan is a staff writer and co-founder at Defector, and he is the author of a new book that comes out on August 19th, Changeover, a young rivalry and a new era of men's tennis. It's about who other than Alcaraz and Sinner, and it is available for pre-order right now. You can find the link in our show notes. Giri, thanks for being here. I read a lot of the book over the weekend, and I really enjoyed it. And one passage has stuck with me. You write, "There is something genuinely sweet about how often Alcaraz and Sinner say nice things about each other and how well they seem to get along. It's not fake, or at least it doesn't seem to be. That makes it all the more compelling when they face each other across the net. They did look pretty warm towards each other as they met at the net after the match and had nice things to say about each other. First of all, thanks for joining the show. And second, is it plausible for that spirit of kinship to survive if they keep going at each other in this way?"
It's a great question, and thanks for having me on the show. I think among the imagination of tennis fans, maybe they want this to be a kind of best friendship that exists in parallel with one of the great rivalries the sport has ever seen. But I think in practice, that kind of thing is very difficult to maintain. And if you hear from, let's say Novak Djokovic spoke about this last season, after he'd played his last match against Rafa Nadal, arguably the greatest rival of Djokovic's career, he was like, there were moments where I wanted to get closer to Rafa, but when you are competing in the zero-sum competition for these stakes that are so high, you can't really reveal yourself fully to a rival like that. So I think there are certainly limits in terms of how close a friendship can get in the context of pro tennis. But I also think you can look at something like the friendship between Roger Federer and Rafa. And, their careers were slightly offset in the time trajectory. And by the end of it, Rafa was still playing and Federer was ready to retire. And you look at their retirement ceremony and they're both holding hands and blubbering. And it's very emotional and very sweet. So I think it's possible. I think it's something they matured into in pro tennis. But no, at the moment, Sinner and Alcaraz do seem to have a pretty pleasant professional relationship. So we'll see how that develops.
Like most people, probably, I tend to root for Alcaraz, I guess just because the highs of his game are so high and so compelling. But I'm kind of glad Sinner won this one because I want the rivalry to stay close, because this is just more fun for me if it's neck and neck, if neither really has a clear lead. And Sinner had lost 5 matches in a row against Alcaraz, including that tough French final. So for him to win this one on Alcaraz's literal turf, sort of where he's historically been so successful, it feels like an equalizer, even though Alcaraz still has one more major. So I wonder what you think Sinner did to adjust to that tough defeat in the French, and just generally, how has each of them pushed the other? Are they kind of as each other's nemesis, even though they're friends, nemesis on the court, at least, have they pushed each other to greater heights, which is another hallmark of a great rivalry?
Yeah, I think absolutely they have. I think in this last stretch of play where Alcaraz has strung together this 5-0 little run, I think Sinner has basically been right there in 4 out of those 5 matches, and he really didn't have to come at this particular match in a drastically different way, as tennis always is a game of small margins. So it was about Sinner serving a little better, which he absolutely did, and then Sinner basically makes his opponents play so fast. Ben Shelton actually said, Sinner makes you feel like you're playing tennis at 2x speed. And what that does to Alcaraz is that it kind of takes away his creativity. He prefers a little bit more time to hit all those spectacular drop shots and, creative playmaking all over the court. So when Sinner's rushing him, he doesn't have time to do that. So Sinner definitely executed that game plan really well at Wimbledon. And in terms of their overall rivalry and how they've pushed each other more, it's kind of amazing. Like each one I think this is also a hallmark of great rivalry, but each one has a little bit of something that the other one would really like to incorporate into his own game. And I think with Sinner, he has spoken about Alcaraz has that touch and that feel and that creativity with the volleys and the drop shots. And Sinner's a little bit more, by disposition, he's a little bit more conventional in his tennis. He doesn't take as many big risks. But on the flip side of it, Alcaraz really admires how solid Sinner is from a point-by-point basis. He really doesn't have the dips, the peaks and valleys that you see over the course of an Alcaraz match. And I think as each of them try to incorporate a little bit of the other's kind of tennis spirit, it'll be fun to see who arrives at a more complete game faster than the other.
It's so interesting. This rivalry has taken over the tennis world just as the end of the Big Three era is really coming to be. I don't think that the ATP could have scripted it any better to have like a new rivalry kind of form up. So there's kind of like there are no lost years almost. But I'll be honest, look, tennis is my first love. It's how I got into sports writing. I have a little bit of trouble getting super engaged in this rivalry because it's just lacking a little bit maybe of angst or aggro or like suffering. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's just like, like they've had some bad matches, but they both found so much success at such kind of a relatively young age, and they faced adversity. They overcome it very quick. And now it's like, oh, is this person going to have 5 majors or 6 majors? Or is this person going to have 3 or 4? And those stakes don't feel that high to me, maybe compared to just the outsizedness. Tell me I'm wrong. Because it's not that I don't enjoy their matches. Like, I'm not. Yeah, no, but it's totally. Just, I feel there's something missing and I can't quite put my finger on it.
I guess my pet theory, and I'm always cautious to float, generational theories about athletes, but I do think we've moved past kind of the MJ or Serena type mentality, where it's like, not only do I want to beat you, like I want to make you feel bad. Yeah. And I think these guys, basically enjoy one another's company. I even remember a moment at Indian Wells last year where there was a rain delay in the match and they both walked off the court together, kind of chatting, and were hanging out in the locker room during the rain delay. And the thought of that is, totally anathema to, like a 90s or superstar like Jordan. So I think they're just a little bit better adjusted, for lack of a better word. That's good. I'm happy for them. It's probably good for them in the long term. What we do miss out on as fans is that kind of nastiness that does accompany many of the good rivalries.
Or even sports. Tension. It doesn't even have to be meanness. Just like there felt, because they were so different, it felt like, and because Federer established himself as the king and Nadal came up so quickly to kind of challenge that when nobody expected anyone to, there was always this tension there. And of course, Djokovic is tension personified, his entire existence. And so maybe that's what I'm missing more than like, I hate you.
It's totally possible that there will be this like third interloper in the rivalry, and maybe that's what gives it a little bit of that extra bite that you're looking for. But at the moment it's just the two of them, and I'm very curious to see who can rise up to join them.
Yeah, maybe the Djokovic to their Federer and Nadal comes along sometime soon and even surpasses them. But I think that's part of it too, is just that those three set the bar so high that we can't have the GOAT debate for a while. I mean, we could maybe on a rate basis, but congrats, Sinner, you won your 4th major. Djokovic has 20 more than that. So, even if these guys are as great as they seem to be, it's going to be years and years and years until they're really seriously chasing down those records. So you can have the conversation in the way that we do, where each generation of athletes is maybe better than their predecessors. And you could say that, in any single match, maybe they're the best ever to do it, but the career accolades, you can't quite yet. And I hate to impose a prediction on you, but since we are talking long term, if you had to assess their games, their makeups, etc., and pick one to have a better career, hopefully 15 years from now when the dust settles and we're evaluating everything in hindsight, which one do you think is the better bet to have the superior career?
It's interesting because I think my prediction might have shifted even in the last 5 or 6 weeks. Just because the way I thinking about it before is that Alcaraz was going to kind of dominate the natural surfaces of clay and grass. He kind of has more natural footwork there. And Sinner's just was made for hard courts. So I thought they were kind of balanced in that respect. But then I saw Sinner push Alcaraz to 3 championship points on clay, and then here beat him at Wimbledon. And now I'm shifting slightly in that direction, I think. I think the constancy of his performance from match to match and just how quickly he's improved a lot of those aspects that he did envy in Alcaraz. We saw Sinner at the net slightly more than Alcaraz in this final, which is pretty surprising. And he's just been willing to get out of his comfort zone in ways that I didn't necessarily see in him, even this time last year. So I would say at this point, maybe Sinner by a hair, but I think it's going to be very, very close.
You had talked earlier about the different ways that, an Alcaraz might stress players, or that Sinner might stress players, Sinner making people feel like they're playing tennis on a 2x speed or like you're on fire. One of the things I'm curious about, because after the match, in the course of the kind of kind words that they gave each other, they sort of talked about iron sharpening iron in both cases. I enjoy competing against you. And there's a million examples of this in sports where, a specific athlete has prompted another specific athlete to get better at something. Like Tiger Woods made Phil Mickelson realize he had to hit the ball farther instead of just focus on shot making. I wonder what you've noticed in the ways that Alcaraz and Sinner play tennis that you think might be being enriched by having to beat the other. Not necessarily in every slam final, but in the last couple, in every slam final.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the answer is probably slightly different for both of them. But just to take one example, if you look at this 0-5 stretch where Alcaraz was able to edge Sinner out in these close matches, I think what it came down to was Sinner was somewhat intimidated by the Alcaraz defense in a lot of cases. And I think he didn't serve as well as he could have in all 5 of those matchups. He was kind of at or below his yearly average for getting his first serve into play. And what he's had to do, and what we saw demonstrated beautifully in the Wimbledon final, is basically go super aggressive, even on second serves where necessary. And there were instances where he was at 30-all in a crucial game late in the match, and he decided to go 117 miles per hour on his second serve, right on the corner. Chalk flies up. It's an ace. So I think the fact Sinner's basically had to become comfortable finding a level of aggression that he doesn't even need to try against 99.9% of the tour. He's had to find that little extra margin of kind of ambition in his shot making. And the truth is, if you're going to contrast these guys in the eyes of their rivals, it's probably an issue of predictability. So when they go into a match against Jannik Sinner, they know what that match is going to feel like. And it's going to feel really bad because he's putting the ball right on top of your feet at 100 miles an hour over and over again. When they go up against Alcaraz, there's a whole bag of tricks, and they don't really know which he's going to use at any given time. And I think that unsettles people in a different way. But when they go against each other, I think they're quite familiar with each other's game at this point. And so now it's a matter of, Sinner actually mixing in the drop shot that is Alcaraz's specialty, and Sinner getting to net, and then Carlos trying to find the serving. Even though he's not as natural a server as Jannik, he does need to find ways to apply the same pressure that Jannik has managed to. So it really is, okay, actually Sinner even pointed this out after press, or his coach did, I should say. He said, Jannik doesn't watch any of his peers on TV as often as he watches Carlos, because he's trying to see how Carlos is improving, how quickly Carlos is improving, and trying to figure out how we can basically keep pace with that on our end. So, we think of the tour as encompassing dozens of high-end players, but we're in an era, at least for the moment, where it's two guys laser focused in on the other and trying to keep up in this arms race.
One of the things that really did impress me about Sinner, I mean, so much does. I'm not a hater, I promise. But was his resiliency from that devastating French Open loss, and then to be able to come back and win on grass, a surface he hasn't had his most biggest successes on. And I found that super compelling. And of course, his run through the title. I mean, that Dimitrov match will be one of the greatest what ifs, right? If he was down 2 sets to Dimitrov was playing out of his mind, and then Dimitrov gets injured. I mean, that match wasn't over. And so I still believe Sinner had a really decent chance at coming back, and there are no asterisks. But, you know, that is very interesting, and I think shows more resiliency than we necessarily see on a week-in, week-out basis because of the consistency he has.
Yeah, and it's one of the nice things about tennis that there's some randomness and variability, but also more so than in a lot of sports and team sports specifically, you can kind of count on the best matching up against each other fairly frequently over the course of their careers. Whereas in other sports, it's maybe harder to have rivalries because so many other things can interfere with those teams matching up. And, you know, Lindsay said, like, Sinner went through that tough French match. It's been an eventful and challenging year in a number of ways for him. And as we kind of covered, there's no heel or villain in this rivalry, but Sinner, of course, had the multiple positive PED tests and then the suspension, didn't miss a major. We talked about that here on Hang Up. We didn't come down too hard on him. There were extenuating circumstances, but there were a lot of people who were critical of how that was handled and accused of favoritism, you know, bias for a star player, etc. So is his success since returning from the suspension, is this something that can sort of erase that stain, put it behind him? Not that anyone was questioning whether he was actually good or was some sort of product of chemistry or something, but the longer he goes and is great without any additional marks on his resume like that, will that sort of fade, do you think, or will that continue to haunt him to some extent?
It's really interesting. I think one of the most interesting ways to look at it is in the eyes of his peers. And Sinner has spoken about, after the Australian Open, which he won, he was feeling a lot of bad vibes in the locker room. And he considered taking a break from tour just for kind of purely emotional, social reasons. He ended up having to because of the suspension, as you noted. But it does seem like he hasn't fully shaken off this reputation in his workplace. Who knows whether that's just a matter of time. It's actually one of those things where I'm not sure winning even serves his interest in terms of just reputational rehab, because especially around the time of the US Open last year, when this news first broke, there was a lot of effort to try to connect his success with the doping and add an asterisk to all his achievements. So I think that the haters who are out there in his sphere are going to continue, and quite vocally in some especially putrid cases like Nick Kyrgios. But I do think, me personally, having looked into the case fairly closely, I think if there was any injustice done, it's just the kind of unequal ways that players navigate it depending on their resources. And Jannik Sinner has the resources for cutting-edge legal team that was able to overturn temporary suspensions and let this thing play out basically behind closed doors. Whereas for, maybe the number 400 player in the world, it's just not going to be as smooth a process. But to the question of whether I think he intentionally sought out a performance edge by using this over-the-counter topical spray, I don't really think so. But again, the peer group is a whole nother question. And the ATP and the Tennis Watchdog Agency for doping held some informational sessions to kind of explain the case to his fellow players. And if I remember Ben Rothenberg's reporting correctly, only one player on tour showed up to those meetings to learn more. And that was Chris Eubanks, who's also a commentator on the tour and really smart and thoughtful guy. So I think a lot of players have probably just made up their mind that, this guy's a little dirty, and it'll be very tough to shift those impressions.
There's not much in the way of similarity between the men's and women's finals this year, but there is the similarity between, Iga Świątek and Jannik Sinner both having undergone these doping cases. And there's also a similar resiliency between what they dealt with at the French Open and then coming back and finding their excellence maybe in unexpected ways on the grass. I actually think Iga's story, I know it's hard to talk about that final, a 6-love, Amanda Anisimova just froze. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. She completely froze. It happens. We've seen it happen to men. We've seen it happen to women. It is a very, you do not want to freeze against Iga Świątek because she is one of the quickest playing, fastest players and the most ruthless. I mean, her bakery is infamous for a reason. If you give her an opening, other players would lose a couple games on their own and maybe give you a chance to find your form. She's not going to. It happened. It's not great, but it happened. But I actually think the Iga story of Iga winning Wimbledon in the macro is a wonderful story for women's tennis.
Yeah,
and
it really
fascinating. I mean, I did not see this coming.
Totally, yeah. It's very much a rumors of Iga being washed have been greatly exaggerated situation because she had fallen a little bit from her perch at the top of the women's game, which she basically sat at uninterrupted for 2 full seasons as the number 1 player in the world. And for years, she had kind of written off Wimbledon as, the grass season's super short. My game's optimized for clay and hard courts. Why would I go out of my way to figure out grass? And it almost had this defeatism baked into it. And you see it from clay specialists on the men's tour as well. It's like, why bother trying to win at grass? But it seems that this year she has realized that I'm the best mover on the women's tour. Grass is at its core kind of a movement puzzle. How do you run fast out there without slipping around on the turf? How do you manage to defend effectively, even though it's such a treacherous terrain? And it really clicked for her this year. And I think the fact that she's now a threat to win all 4 majors is going to be huge for her career going forward. I think having just gotten over this psychological burden of grass not being her thing is going to be huge for her. And I'm very excited to see how she comes back to meet Aryna Sabalenka, who in the meantime has firmly established herself as the most consistent player across all the 4 majors. So yeah, this was a huge moment in women's tennis to see Iga rebound on her worst surface.
Am I right that we now have 3 players, Carlos, Jannik, and Iga, all one went away from the career slam?
That's correct. Yeah, for Carlos, yeah. I mean, and Jannik Sinner, he was 1 point away from career slam.
Well, we didn't know it at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Look in retrospect, but yeah, they're all super close to competing at wildly young ages.
And Iga was the 8th first-time women's champion at Wimbledon in a row, so there's been a lot of changeover. Plug for your book there. That final was the opposite of an upset, but the rest of the tournament leading up to that was nothing but upsets. And I know I just said that tennis has the virtue of being a bit more predictable and getting to see the best against the best, but that was sort of the story on the women's bracket. Does that mean anything? Were there any particularly surprising results to you?
There were, I guess, looking at the bigger trend of just the we've kind of had this carousel of new Wimbledon winners over the last 8 seasons, ever since Serena won her last in 2016. And what I see going forward is that solidifying a little bit. I think once Iga's figured out a surface, you can count on her to keep showing up again in the finals. And I think Sabalenka has also established a level of consistency. So I think that trend is probably going to even out a little bit where we see some more repeat winners. But overall in the tournament, I think in terms of interesting upsets, I think the Anisimova run was incredible. I was super high on her when she broke out as this teenage prodigy. She's had a lot of challenges since then, but she has kind of taken the scenic route back to the top of the tour. And watching her edge out Sabalenka in an extremely tense 3-setter made me pretty excited to see what Anisimova at only 23 is going to do for the rest of her career, despite this tough result in the final.
Well, I think your follow-up to Changeover should be about the sandwich generation of tennis, the Tsitsipas and Medvedevs of the world. If they're not going to win any more majors, at least give them another book. That would be a consolation. And I wonder, in closing, Are you more happy that the French and Wimbledon have provided great publicity for your book, or more frustrated that you could not include those developments in the book?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of both feelings. To the sandwich generation point, I will say there's a love letter to the sandwich folks right in the middle of the book.
That's good.
So they get their due. But overall, I had to learn to embrace the finish line for a project, because when you're writing about careers that are ongoing, there's always this temptation to keep tacking on a new chapter and a new chapter and a new chapter. And that temptation was very strong this summer, as you could imagine.
Yeah.
But I guess I'll tell myself I'm saving it all for the sequel. So let's see.
Or the paperback edition.
Right.
He is Giri Nathan, a staff writer and co-founder at Defector and the author of the forthcoming book Changeover, a young rivalry and a new era of men's tennis. That's out August 19th, and I spent a lot of my weekend with it. Really liked it while I was on my tennis kick. Find a pre-order link in our show notes and look for it August 19th. Giri, thanks so much.
Thank you guys for having me.
Up next, all is not well in the land of the free and the home of the Atlanta Braves.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
If you're running a business right now, you already know it's hard. Tight budgets, hiring freezes, and economic uncertainty are just the beginning. Good news. Upwork is helping small businesses do more with less. Upwork is the hiring platform designed for the modern playbook, where you can find, hire, and pay expert freelancers who deliver results from day one. It's perfect for businesses on tight budgets, fast timelines, and with zero room for error. Never tried Upwork? Well, now is the perfect time, because they are giving Political Gabfest listeners a $200 credit after spending $1,000 in the first 30 days. That's $200 that you can put towards your next freelancer, whether it's design help, AI automation, admin support, marketing, or whatever your business needs. Visit upwork.com/save right now for this great offer. That is upwork.com/save to get a $200 credit to put towards your next freelancer to help grow your business. That's upwork.com/SAVE, upwork.com/save. Don't wait. This offer is only valid June 24th through August 5th, 2025. The Major League Baseball All-Star Game is this week in Atlanta. It's a big celebration of the sport, and before the season, the hometown Braves probably thought that it would be a pretty nice celebration of themselves too. Although I should correct myself. It is not in Atlanta, the All-Star Game. The All-Star Game is in Cobb County. It is intentionally, very much on purpose on the team's part, not in the city of Atlanta. But anyway, it's a celebration of baseball and was supposed to be one of the Braves. Before the season, when ESPN convened 28 of its baseball media people to make preseason picks, 18 of the 28 had the Braves winning the NL East. 2 of them had them winning the World Series, which doesn't sound like much, but when you consider that 20 of the 28 picked the Dodgers, the Braves had a quarter of the everybody else vote. And they were expected to be, as they are most years, one of the best teams in baseball. It has not gone that way. The Braves started 0-7, and though they briefly dug out to be a game over 500 in May, they have been pretty bad. They enter this break at 42-53, 9.5 games out of the wild card, and with playoff chances, according to Fangraphs, of a mere 3.5%, down from about 90% on opening day. Why have the Braves been so bad? There are many things you could say: injuries to frontline starters and position players, regression from others, the loss of starter Max Fried in free agency to the Yankees, bad managing or bad luck or both in one-run games, which they've lost a ton of, even a PED suspension to a player who was supposed to be good for them. But Ben, what sticks out to you the most about why one of the most consistently good teams in baseball is not?
Yeah, just to put into additional perspective how bad it's been, they are just 4 years removed from winning the World Series, 2 years removed from winning 104 games, and having one of the best hitting teams of all time. And a lot can change in baseball in 2 years or 4 years. Certainly, you just afterballed the Nationals post-championship collapse last week, but it is pretty steep and pretty stark. And the Braves have not missed the playoffs since 2017, so this would be pretty big if this is the year that that streak is snapped. And as you said, it's not just that they were good recently, they were expected to be really good this year. And looking at those changes in playoff odds since opening day, they're down 89 percentage points. No other team is down more than 49 percentage points. Their odds of winning the division, which now round down to 0, they're so far behind, have fallen 63 percentage points. No other teams are down by more than 34. So in some respects, it's maybe twice as bad a season, twice as disappointing a season as anyone else has had. And of course, that's because they had such high expectations coming in. Only the Dodgers had higher playoff odds or division odds or a higher projected win total per Fangraphs this spring. So I think you hit on one factor, which is just bad luck. Always good to get that out of the way. Standard sabermetric, small sample size variance. Everyone loves that as an explanation. But they are 13-24 in one-run games, which are largely governed by randomness. They've actually outscored their opponents by 2 runs on the season, which isn't great, but usually you outscore your opponents. You also outwin them, and that has not happened. They should be more of a 500-ish team that's a couple games out of a wild card spot than a 42-53 team that's almost 10 games out. So other than luck and randomness, and my effectively wild co-host Meg Rowley would certainly cite their abomination of a mascot blooper who disturbs her on a deep fundamental level. But really, like last season, they won only 89 games, which was kind of a down year for them, and they squeaked into the playoffs on the last day of the season. But they had a huge number of injuries last year, by far the most projected value lost to injured players, including their best position player, Ronald Acuna Jr., and their best pitcher, Spencer Strider, or, well, expected to be their best pitcher. Chris Sale ended up winning the Cy Young Award last season. But those guys are back this year. They've returned, and that was expected to be a big boost for them. They have had more injuries. They've lost most of a starting rotation to injury this year, but you can't blame it solely on that the way that you could last year. It's a lot of the players who were supposed to be good and have been playing, but have not played up to expectations. And it's kind of the same cast because year in and year out, this roster has been very stable, really unusually stable in this era of baseball because the Braves signed all of their guys to extensions, which seemed like a great idea at the time and for a long time. But some of those guys now are making those extensions seem not so hot.
Maybe the greatest case of not so hot is their center fielder, Michael Harris Jr., who is like a great player or supposed to be. He was the Rookie of the Year a few years ago. He has very consistently been worth between 3-ish and 5-ish wins above replacement. And this year, correct me if I'm wrong, but he is like the worst hitter in baseball, kind of period, the end. He's such a good outfielder that he's still in positive numbers, at least in wins above replacement. But to what extent have the Braves players just fallen off of cliffs?
Yeah, to a large extent. He's actually in negative territory now, according to Fangraphs. At least that's how bad it's been. So, yeah, they didn't do much over the offseason, and that was kind of defensible because they had these big players returning and because they had so many holdovers locked in at a ton of positions. And so their big offseason addition late in the offseason was Jurickson Profar, who was coming off this big breakout and then tested positive for PEDs early this season, missed half the regular season, recently returned, but would be ineligible for the postseason if they somehow made it. And so it's the guys who have sort of been the stalwarts there. Players like Austin Riley, who's hurt right now, Ozzie Albies, who was signed to an extension that seemed almost criminally team-friendly when it was signed, and now there's some question about whether they will want to keep him around. And Harris, whose bat just has not been enough to make it work even with the good gloves. So their offense is below average now. And it wasn't great last season, but you could kind of write that off and say it's just a down year. They'll bounce back. They'll be at full strength. And that's not the case. Acuna came back. He's still great. Sean Murphy, their catcher, has kind of bounced back. In fact, they have multiple catchers now who are really productive because they called up Drake Baldwin to basically be a backup for Sean Murphy, but he could be starting for most of the teams in baseball. And, they still have Matt Olson, who replaced Acuna in the home run derby. Like, there's a lot of talent there. But they've been shorthanded, literally, in the rotation due to all the injuries, and they just have not been able to hit their way out of holes the way that they did a couple seasons ago.
We've got the trade deadline upcoming. Is there anything they can do?
In theory, yes, although right now they're positioned more to be on the selling side than the buying side, unless they're irrationally exuberant, which they might be because there is precedent. In 2021, they kind of turned their season around. Acuna was hurt. They replaced him. They brought on a bunch of midseason additions, and they ended up making a run all the way to the World Series. And on June 18th, their president of baseball operations, Alex Anthopoulos, said, "We're not selling." Pretty definitive. A month from now, we're 30 games under or something crazy. I guess I would reconsider. I've been in the postseason personally, talking about myself, totally selfishly, 10 seasons in a row. I don't remember what it feels like to not be contending. So he's getting reacquainted with that feeling. When the All-Star break ends, when teams start playing again on Friday, it will have been exactly a month since Anthopoulos said that. And they aren't 30 games under, but they have gone 10-14 since that quote. They just have not been able to get anything together. They started really slow, and then they kind of put it together, and then they slumped again, and then they went okay, and then it's been bad recently. So there just doesn't seem to be a sign that they're suddenly going to be firing on all cylinders. So there aren't that many players they can trade if they decide to do that because, again, of the aforementioned extensions, which when they signed all those extensions, that was seen as not necessarily like the new inefficiency or something. It's not like they invented extensions, but it was seen as a competitive advantage that they managed to get all these guys to stay. And their core was signed for a decade or more, and they hardly had to do anything over the winter. It's like all their business was taken care of, and each guy they signed to an extension made it easier, seemingly, to persuade the next player to want to stick around. You don't want FOMO when all of your teammates are signing long-term too. So could they just bank on an incredible rest of the season and go get some starters, go get some relief health? They could, but really the improvement has to come internally. And I think they almost have to, at this point, look at the few players who are not on long-term contracts, like a Marcell Ozuna, someone like that, who could potentially be moved. That just, it seems to be a much more compelling case that they could pack it in. And, there's still a couple weeks before the deadline, and they could just white knuckle it to the very end to see where they stand.
How much of this is just stars underperforming, as you mentioned, or kind of injuries versus just like this institutional kind of failings? I think, I apologize if I'm saying this name wrong, Matt Kreitzberg on X pointed out that their farm system, the hitting in all of their farm subsidiary, is just as bad, if not worse, as what's going on. So it seems like there's a developmental issue as well.
Yeah, some of that I think is just sort of cyclical. They had a great farm system. They brought up a bunch of guys, these core pieces in their lineup, and then usually that leads to sort of a down cycle in the minors. Plus, if you're contending year in and year out, then you don't have high draft picks, and that might hurt you a little bit. But it is true that they have one of the lower rated farm systems, and there's not really a lot of help on the way in the short term on the offensive side. So when you do have a couple down seasons in a row, and if they miss the playoffs despite coming into the season as one of the best teams everyone expected, then yeah, you do start to look around and you do start to question, what are we doing wrong? And Brian Snitker, who's been there for about a decade, he's one of the longest tenured managers in baseball, but he's 70 years old. He maybe people have accused him or the team of complacency. You know, they won one, they're not playing with the same urgency. You never really know. It's like the XKCD comic about sort of the random number generator, and then we kind of fit narratives onto these things after the fact. So, you know, if they'd had average luck in these close games and in runners in scoring position and high leverage moments and everything, and they were a little bit over 500 now, I don't know that we would say tear it all down. We'd just say, oh, it's a slow start, and they could easily, because, you know, some of the teams, there are several teams ahead of them in the wild card race, and it's always hard to imagine leapfrogging that many teams, but a lot of those teams aren't that great, certainly weren't expected to be nearly as competitive as Atlanta, but it's not a great situation. And, you know, this has been looked at as one of the best front offices in the game, given their sustained success, given that they seem to blend the old school and the new school successfully, that they've developed this culture that clearly a lot of their players wanted to be a part of, that front office has a reputation for never leaking anything. Often they report their own transactions. They scoop the Passons and the Rosenthals of the world for whatever that's worth. So I don't know that I would look at this season and say, yeah, time to start over, time to clean house. But it is, you know, apologies to the Orioles, but this is probably the most disappointing season anyone has had this year.
Point taken that it's not time to clean house, but I am curious before we wrap about kind of the most bearish case about the Braves, which is that Spencer Strider off of Tommy John does not seem quite like his old self, though maybe that's not fair to ask. But he's also, you know, gets older. You don't get to pause aging as you come back, and he's 27, so about what the typical peak age is for a baseball player right now. The Chris Sale revival last year was cool, but he's old. Probably not going to see more pitching at that level from him. Spencer Schwellenbach is awesome. Another young pitcher, fractured elbow. AJ Smith-Shawver, interesting young pitcher, Tommy John surgery. It really has just piled up, and all of those hitters are getting older, including some guys who are already well on the wrong side of 30. What would you do? Not just at the trade deadline, because it does seem like there's only so much you can do when your roster is pretty locked in, but what would you do, Ben, if you were Alex Anthopoulos this offseason? Yeah,
it does make it difficult to upgrade dramatically when you do have all these players signed, which, again, seemed like a feature, not a bug for the longest time. But then how do you actually make major moves if you don't have obvious holes, or if the players that you counted on to be the productive ones are the ones giving you a problem? They're not old, really. Like, a lot of these players are still theoretically in their physical primes. Ronald Acuna is still 27 years old. Matt Olson's just 31. Sean Murphy is not 31 yet. Albies is 28. Harris is 24. Riley's 28. So in theory, like, even though they have been contending for quite a long time now, they're not as old as you would think necessarily. So you wouldn't...
Yeah, they're not, actually. When I asked you that question, I thought each of Olsen and Murphy were 2 years older than they are.
Right.
Turns out they're not.
And maybe there's a lot of mileage on them. One thing that has made them stand out, whether it's good or bad, is that they have played a ton of games. You know, there's a tendency toward load management in MLB. We don't talk about it as much as we do in basketball, let's say. You know, with pitchers, we do, certainly. But even with position players, guys take more days off now. And analytically, that seems to make some sense. The Braves have kind of gone against that in recent years. And they've had guys like Olsen, who's just playing every single day. And some people thought maybe that was why they had all those injuries last season, that it just all kind of caught up to them. And, you know, they've more or less just tried to be durable, at least when they're physically capable of playing even this season. So I guess you could say there's more mileage on them maybe than typical players their age. But I would say that there's enough talent there that you do just kind of retool and hope that you don't get bitten by the injury bug as much as they did last year and even this year. And you have a full season of Acuna and a full season of Strider, and maybe further removed from Strider's surgery, his stuff comes all the way back. And maybe they are more active this offseason than they were last offseason when they sort of sat on their hands much of the winter. Maybe there's a big move you could make or some change of scenery trades. I don't think they can sort of stand pat again and just expect to be the class of the NL East again. It's a competitive division. But I don't think that it's over for them. I don't think that we should look at this as the swan song or the last gaffes necessarily. It could be just a blip or a blooper. It could just be an off year. And I do still believe that they'll be back, or at least they'll enter next season with people picking them once again to win this division or at least make the playoffs.
Up next, the Club World Cup wrapped up over the weekend. How did it go? We don't really know, but we're going to ask someone who thinks he might have a handle on it.
Member Week is here at Lowe's. Don't miss your chance to get up to 40% off hundreds of items like paint, faucets, vanities, doors, and more. Shop our exclusive deals happening in-store and online now through July 18th. Not a member? Join My Lowe's Pro Rewards for free today and get ready to save more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
The Jack Welch Management Institute at Strayer University helps you go from, I know the way, to I've arrived with our top 10 ranked online MBA. Gain skills you can learn today and apply tomorrow. Get ready to go from make it happen to made it happen and keep striving. Visit strayer.edu/Jack Welch MBA to learn more. Strayer University is certified to operate in Virginia by Chev and has many campuses, including at 2121 15th Street North in Arlington, Virginia.
Close your eyes, exhale, feel your body relax, and let go of whatever you're carrying today.
Well, I'm letting go of the worry that I wouldn't get my new contacts in time for this class. I got them delivered free from 1-800-CONTACTS. Oh my gosh, they're so fast.
And breathe.
Oh, sorry. I almost couldn't breathe when I saw the discount they gave me on my first order. Oh, sorry. Namaste.
Visit 1-800-CONTACTS.com today to save on your first order.
1-800-CONTACTS.
On Sunday in the Meadowlands, Chelsea beat Paris Saint-Germain 3-0 to wrap a tournament that didn't exist until this year and seemed to be answering questions about itself or trying to with each passing day. It's a big win for Chelsea, by the way, over a PSG side that had only recently won the Champions League. Of course, what did this actually mean for Chelsea? As the headline said in Yahoo Sports, does Club World Cup title make Chelsea, quote, undisputed champions of the world? Even its captain doesn't seem to think so. This was the first playing of the Club World Cup, an event that ran from mid-June for just shy of a full month and seemed to go towards FIFA's desire not to leave a single hole in the calendar unexploited by the opportunity to generate media rights and ticket revenue. I watched a handful of the games, including some of the final, and credit where due, it sure did seem like the people involved cared a lot, and some of the crowds looked very full and boisterous, so it felt like a big deal, and there were cool matchups between teams from all over the world that never would otherwise have the occasion to play each other. Henry Bushnell wrote that story for Yahoo, and he is one of the best soccer writers you will find on Al Gore's internet, and he covered the tournament intensely in person, including that over the past few weeks. Henry is good enough to call in to hang up right before he boards a train after his coverage of the final. Henry, I'd like to start by asking you this. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is a cash grab with no soul or justification for existing beyond FIFA's business, and 10 is a great tournament that adds something distinct to the soccer calendar and people will be excited about in the future, where is the Club World Cup?
I'd put it at an extremely solid 5. I think it was right in the middle between those two things that you just described. It was below the expectations that were set when this was first a concept, and a concept that a lot of people believed in, but that then over the past year or so, people realized that FIFA didn't quite have the buy-in from all the stakeholders around the soccer world that was necessary for this type of tournament to get up off the ground. But it exceeded expectations over the month or two leading into the tournament when we realized that FIFA really hadn't marketed this well and ticket sales were not going well. And there just seemed to be a general apathy towards it among the American market and a very negative attitude towards it throughout Europe. So I think it came to life more than some people would have expected recently. but there are still a lot of inherent flaws with it.
So Alex referred to Chelsea sort of downplaying its own achievement. How seriously did the players take this tournament when it comes to showing up and giving their all and then celebrating the win?
I think that answer to that question is different depending on which players you're talking about. Especially the South American players and players from other continents really took to this tournament because it was their first and really their only opportunity in a lot of cases outside of playing for their national teams at the big World Cup to play against the best players in the world. And it was a platform for them to try to prove themselves and try to prove that maybe all the best players aren't in Europe. The European players, they cared because there was a lot of money on the line, and each of them worked out bonus payments with their own clubs for the most part, but the clubs made a lot of money, which meant that they could give a lot of money to the players. So it mattered. Like the deeper they got into the tournament, you especially saw Chelsea during the group stage. There were times when it felt like they maybe didn't care that much. But as they started winning, it started meaning more to them. So I think they did care, but there's a different level of, there are levels to caring, right? And it was not what you would see at an actual World Cup when these guys are playing for their national teams. It was certainly something below that.
Yeah, I was struck by you mentioning, like, there's no parade scheduled for this. You know, like these tentpoles that we use to celebrate these big championships, they're all gone, but there was still a lot of fanfare. And for me, kind of the most interesting part about this was thinking about the U.S. hosting the World Cup in just a year. Of course, not alone, but hosting a lot of it, and what that means. There were some low attended games. It increased as time went on. I think it sounds like dynamic pricing. Turns out people like affordable things. Like, if you price things affordably, they might come. That seemed to help. You know a lot more about this than I do. What are your takeaways from all this for the United States as a host country and for the appetite for elite soccer?
Yeah, there are a lot of takeaways. I mean, the main thing that I think a lot of people from around the world were struck by was actually the heat,
yes.
the weather here. And there are actually two aspects of this. One is the summer thunderstorms and the weather delays that we saw at probably 6 or 7 games, which I've done some research on this. It's a fact of life here. There are a lot more lightning and thunderstorms here than there are in Europe. And I think that a lot of the Europeans just weren't ready for that. And then the heat, it happened to coincide with a heat wave, but those are getting more and more common, obviously, and more intense. And it's something that...
Yeah, it's not like a June and July heat waves are unprecedented.
Right, exactly. And even, Chelsea players were talking yesterday after the tournament about how it was really difficult for them. And, Enzo Fernandez, one of their 2 captains, said earlier this week that he got dizzy playing in the semifinal and had to go down to the ground at one point and said it was dangerous. So that's something that FIFA is going to have to deal with kickoff times, with maybe other measures that we haven't thought of yet. There are also a ton of organizational things that were interesting. Yesterday before the final, I hung out around some PSG fans who were marching toward the stadium, like as one, like what they call the ultras in Europe. And it was interesting to see New Jersey State Police and other authorities deal with them. And it's this super delicate balance that requires an understanding of European fan culture, of wanting to make sure everything is in control and keep all these, really passionate fans going in the direction that you want them to go and not causing any trouble, but not over policing them in a way that would cause a lot of trouble in its own way. So I think the stadiums so 5 of the stadiums that were hosting this Club World Cup are also host venues for the big World Cup next summer. I think those venues certainly learned a lot about how to deal with the atmosphere that a soccer game brings.
Henry, one of the things that I'm curious about is you talk about the weather and just the heat that we have here and the strain on these guys' bodies, is that there's just so much soccer now. This is something we've talked about before. Chelsea played their first Premier League match this season. I guess it's still this season on August 18th, like almost 10 full months ago. And God, I lost count, but man, they just never stopped playing soccer. To what extent is that working against not just players, enthusiasm, like panache for doing this, but do you think like the appetite for it? Like, are we at soccer oversaturation, or is that impossible? It's the most popular sport in the world.
I 100% agree with it's oversaturated. Yes. No, it's and I think that it was a big issue from a fan perspective. That was a big issue in some of the low attendances that we saw. There's just so much soccer. Heck, there are like a lot of these teams have come over to the US in a very similar time frame for preseason tours in recent years.
Yeah.
And it's oversaturation, and it's just market confusion too. There are all these different competitions or non-competitive games that people can either watch on TV or increasingly go to in person here in the United States. And the diehard fan understands a lot of this, and there's more of an understanding of it in Europe. But here, like, it's very atypical. Like an NFL game is an NFL game, right? A college football game is a college football game. An NBA game, unless it's a weird NBA Cup game, is an NBA game. Like it's weird to have these multiple different competitions, and I think a lot of people just don't understand it. And that was a big struggle with the Club World Cup, and it's a struggle for players too, just from a workload standpoint. And all the players will tell you it's not just physical workload; it's mental workload, and having to be even if you're not playing every single game of a season yourself, maybe you're a fringe player. The mental workload of having to be locked in on this for basically 11 out of 12 months a year, which, if you compare it to an NFL player who's locked in for 6 months a year at most, it's really different from what most American sports. And part of that is because American sports have much stronger players unions. And it's interesting to hear guys like occasionally like Kylian Mbappe or others will compare it to American sports and say like, the workload on us is so much greater. And it really is wild to think about it in that context.
I'm worried that we're going to touch off another round of international climate comparisons here. This often becomes contentious as soon as it hits a high of 80 Fahrenheit in England. We hear, we're all just wilting in the heat, and then we Americans brag about how hot it is here and say, you're all just delicate flowers. This is why we won the Revolutionary War. And then they say, but we don't have air conditioning here, so how would you like it? And it goes on and on. But hot or not, I do kind of enjoy the concept of this multiversal soccer where you have clubs that wouldn't normally play each other playing each other. But it's not only multiversal soccer in that sense, but also in the sense that the clubs that qualified for the Club World Cup are not actually the clubs that are playing in terms of the rosters. And you highlighted this in some of your pieces, that there's very little carryover in some cases, that Chelsea qualified by winning the 2021 Champions League. That was a long time ago. Almost everyone from that team is gone. Is there a way to expedite that qualification process given all of the competing schedule concerns that we just talked about?
There's no good way, I'd say. There are ways, and there are rumblings that we've heard throughout the past month that FIFA would love to do this every 2 years instead of every 4 years. And there's also a chance that you could see it even expand to 48 teams, in which case you can get a lot more teams in it, and you can get a lot more teams who were good recently in it. The big thing with this was that for each continent, the baseline was that the winner of the continental competition over the 4 years leading into this would get in. So one for each of the 4 years. And as you said, for the ones who won in 2021 and 2022, or currently the teams that won the most recent versions of Champions Leagues in 2025, like this past May, a couple months ago, just qualified in theory for the 2029 Club World Cup, when a lot of those players are not going to be there anymore. And in some cases, especially in Europe, the same teams are always good, and it turns out to be okay. But some of these winners end up being relatively random, and that's what you saw with some of the Asian teams in this year's competition. Al Hilal was good, but some of the others were not even the best teams in their countries. One of the things that, because you want it to be meritocratic, but you also want the best teams on this big stage to get the best competition over this month. So it's a really delicate balance. And as I said, there's no good answer for figuring that out.
It's like a on steroids problem of the Champions League. Like, you get in because you played last year, and then you just multiply that by factors. And it's like, well, I'm glad you're here, but the party is kind of over by now. I get it.
Right.
It's odd.
Henry, you cover a lot of women's soccer as well, and I know you from those circles. Is there plans to have this event for the women? And should I be excited or terrified of that?
Yeah. So there are plans. There have supposedly been plans for years. FIFA has been saying that they were moving towards organizing this since, late last decade, I think. And finally, there seems to be a date, 2028, for a women's version of this. The fascinating part is that a women's version of this made so much more sense than a men's version of this, and in a lot of reasons, should have been what FIFA prioritized, because unlike in men's soccer, where everybody pretty much agrees at this point that the best teams are all in Europe, it's very unclear where the best teams in women's soccer are. Are they in the NWSL? Are they in some of these European leagues? Are they maybe even in Brazil or Mexico? That is unsettled because women's soccer is so much more younger. So yes, it's planned. It's going to happen. How is FIFA going to organize it? How big is it going to be? Those are obvious questions, but we'll see. And I think it's in a lot of ways, it's just as intriguing, if not more intriguing, than the men's version.
Completely agreed. One final thing. We talk a lot about how Trump is using sports and kind of weaponizing sports, and are all afraid of kind of the ways he's going to manipulate that with the Olympics and the World Cup coming up. And I think we saw a preview of that. He showed up. He was there with almost his whole cabinet, and then he was on the field during the trophy ceremony. It's hard to find a photo of the celebrations without Trump front and center. How was the reaction to that by kind of the international soccer community and the players? And I guess, what was your takeaway? I mean, there was this bizarre AP headline: Trump marks 1-year anniversary of assassination attempt at the FIFA Club World Cup final, which, what world are we in? I don't know.
Yes, it was the trophy ceremony in particular was super bizarre, and it's unclear how much FIFA was complicit in this. But there is one angle that shows like Gianni Infantino trying to usher Trump to the side away. The tradition is that there's no tradition related to Club World Cups. The tradition at the actual World Cup is that the head of state, to some extent, is involved in handing over the trophy to the captain of the winning team. And then he and the FIFA president, the head of state and the FIFA president, get out of the way, and the team can celebrate. It seems like that was what Gianni Infantino assumed would happen here, at least from one angle of the video. And Trump apparently wanted to stay. And that's what Reece James, Chelsea's captain, said. It seemed like he was asking Trump. I don't know this. Reece James wouldn't tell me what exactly was said between him and Trump, but it certainly seemed from the video like he was wondering whether Trump was going to leave, and Trump wanted to stay and be there. So yes, he's going to be front and center, even more so in 2026. You think about the opening game of the big World Cup, certainly the latter stages of the knockout rounds. He will be there, and there's going to be a fascinating conversation to have over the coming year, and especially next June and July, about all angles of that, and to what extent it constitutes sports washing, which is a term we often associate with the Middle East and stuff like that. So yeah, he's going to be front and center as he was yesterday.
One last non-Trump related question, or less Trump related, what isn't Trump related to some extent. Is there any concern about fatigue when it comes to global soccer competitions? Let's say the Club World Cup really catches on and becomes a staple. It's obviously very different from the World Cup or from Olympic soccer, but it is still players playing on a national stage with people and against people that they wouldn't normally be playing against. So is there any possibility that this could lead to, if we have some major international soccer competition of some sort, basically every summer, does that detract somewhat from the scarcity that makes these events feel rare and special?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think it's a general problem with soccer overall. The more there is, the less important each each tournament feels. But the way the organizers see it, the more there is, the more money they can make. And they're just going to keep going down that road until it's completely unsustainable, or until there is sufficient pushback either from players or other entities to make it stop.
He's Henry Bushnell, a senior reporter for Yahoo Sports and one of my favorite writers and certainly commentators on this event. Henry, thanks for coming on Hang Up and Listen, and thanks for doing it before you go and catch your train.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to head out right now.
And with that, it is time for this week's Afterball. I enjoyed all of our segments today, including this just here with Henry. But I have to confess that I particularly enjoyed talking about the struggles of the Atlanta Braves. My beef with the Braves is personal, obviously. I was not born in the fall of 1992 when the disgraceful Pirates, my team, played a 7-game National League Championship Series against Atlanta. So I was not around to see Barry Bonds make a half-hearted throw to the plate in a failed effort to prevent Sid Bream, an iron-legged 31-year-old first baseman and former Bucco, from scoring the winning run in that Game 7. I could not have known at the time that the Pirates would completely fall apart after that, and that more than 3 decades later, the franchise would represent one of the single greatest threats to my mental health, leisure time, and everything else, and really my enjoyment of sports as a whole. I didn't know these things. But it happened, and so I really never can shed a tear for anything going wrong for the Braves. And in that Game 7, all of those years ago, it was actually Francisco Cabrera, an otherwise unremarkable player, who singled to left towards Bonds with the bases loaded and 2 outs, scored the 2 runs that flipped a Pirates World Series appearance into a Braves pennant and set my life on its current course before I was even around. But really, the game in the series should have been over before Cabrera stepped to the plate, because in the bottom of the 9th, the Pirates had a Cy Young winning pitcher, Doug Drabeck, trying to close out a complete game shutout 2-0. Terry Pendleton of the Braves started the inning with a double, but that was really no big deal. When you're down 2 runs, who cares about a double? He was not the run when you're up 2 runs. Who cares about a double? He was not the run that would have tied the game, much less won it. Now, I say the game was really lost for the Pirates on the next at-bat after Pendleton, when David Justice hit a ground ball to second base, pulling Jose Lind just a few steps to his right, away from first base. It's a slightly above average difficulty play, but routine, really, for a major league second baseman. But Lind booted it. Justice reached base, and 5 batters later, he scored the first of the 2 runs on the hit that also scored Bream to win the game. In other words, my friends, this shit should have been over, or basically over. But it wasn't, because of Lind's error. What would have been the 3rd out a short time later was just the 2nd, and we know what happened after that. Now, I am very hopeful that today's Afterball will not do the kind of psychic damage to me that Jose Lind's error wound up doing all of those years ago. In fact, I look forward to today's Afterball in a way that I can't say nearly the same thing about with regards to the 1992 look back on Game 7 of the NLCS. But Lindsay Gibbs, I do ask you, who is your Jose Lind of the week? Your thing that, if not for this thing, this episode of Hang Up and Listen would have been over, but now it continues.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, Alex. I have no idea who my Jose Lind is, but I do know who my Afterball is about, and that is the legendary Tobin Heath, who officially announced her retirement from professional soccer last week. Heath won 3 NCAA championships with the North Carolina Tar Heels. Love it. 2 NWSL championships with the Portland Thorns, and probably most notably 2 Olympic golds and 2 World Cups with the U.S. women's national team. In her national team career, she scored 36 goals and recorded 42 assists in 181 appearances dating back to 2008. And she even scored the final goal against Japan in that 2015 World Cup final. Meg Linehan of The Athletic wrote about Heath that she is the player the current generation unanimously crowns as the most technical the U.S. has ever had. And she had a creativity, a silky touch, an ability to break a defender's ankles, and endless nutmegs. I am far from a soccer expert, everyone. But even I could get swept away by Heath's talent and aura, I would say, on the field. And I was actually even more intrigued by her aura off the field. Heath was always a bit of a mystery. She didn't fit into the archetypes we associate with athletes, jock or diva or wallflower or class clown. She was just Tobin. Heath played her final pro match almost 3 years ago when she was told that an ongoing knee injury was career-ending. She spent the last few years undergoing surgeries and treatments to try to prove the doctors wrong, but even to this day, she can't run or perform any of the footwork that made her such a wizard on the field, even recreationally. It's pretty devastating. In true Tobin fashion, she ultimately came to terms privately that her playing days were done during a surf trip this past winter, where she dug a hole in the sand and deposited her gift of soccer back into the earth where it could grow. Last week, she finally shared that journey with the public on her podcast with her wife. Yes, wife. They officially confirmed the union. Kristen Press in their podcast, The Recap Show. It was truly one of the rawest and most riveting accounts of an athlete coming to terms with the end of their career that I have ever heard. And so I want to play a few clips from that episode. Your favorite player's favorite player.
So for 2 years, I'd really held on to it. And I tried everything to get back. I spent tens of thousands of dollars and 2 surgeries, 1 crazy surgery, the whole time I believed I was going to get back, and the writing was definitely on the wall. And I just couldn't accept, I think, that was my ending. And it wasn't even this idea, at some point, I think I had accepted, I was never going to return to being a professional athlete, but I never thought the idea would ever happen that I literally couldn't play football for the rest of my life. Yeah. So I felt in a way not coming back was me giving up or giving up the dream or giving up the gift or not being good enough or strong enough to get through it. It's almost I don't know if you would ever know me in my deepest way without football, and I think that's the part of the letting go or the moving on that is the toughest, is this understanding that that piece of me is gone and I'm not gonna get it back, and I don't know who I am without being able to express myself with a football. And that part is a little bit scary because I think we're so tuned to kind of fill our gaps and with something. And I think acceptance is no, this gap's not getting filled.
I'll be honest, I am not usually a big fan of athlete podcasts, but the Recap Show is constantly a revelation. And Heath and Press have been notoriously private over the course of their relationship. But on the show, they've slowly begun to open up about themselves as individuals and as a couple. And it's been just wonderful. Last month in an episode, they shared some of the story of Preeth, which is their couple name. And I'll be honest, it made me think differently about what we expect from our athletes as public figures and why, as important as representation is, it can't come at the expense of authenticity and privacy and grace. And then, as you heard in those clips, I really found Heath's description of acceptance and about why it's been so hard for her to let go of the sport to be both gut-wrenching and awe-inspiring and kind of paradigm shifting for me. This level of vulnerability isn't something we get to experience from our idols often. While Heath's gift of soccer might be deposited, I am so grateful that her gift of self, to be really cheesy about it, is still alive and well, and that she's willing to share it with all of us. Heath changed the way I thought about soccer as a fan, and now she's truly changed the way I think about life, and that's something really special. I'm going to end this Afterball with words from U.S. soccer legend Abby Wambach, who wrote a letter to Tobin in honor of her retirement. The letter is being read by Tobin's wife, Kristen Press, and it sums things up nicely.
You are someone I found to truly love soccer, much more than I ever could. Another thing to spark my envy. I also loved how big you smiled when things worked out, and you placed the ball exactly where you wanted it to be. It often felt like a work of art, when the ball was at your feet. I tried really hard to get into your headspace, at least your assumed headspace, to maybe try and connect in a deeper dimension of existence. Because honestly, I think that's where you went when you played. You went somewhere else, but were capable of being completely present. Maybe that's what presence is. I don't know. But where you went, I wanted to go.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Tobin Heath. That was much better than Jose Lind. That's all for this episode. We also have a special bonus show that is in the podcast feeds right now for our treasured Slate Plus members. It is about the specter of NCAA basketball tournament expansion, the sports business idea that simply will not go away. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now. We will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thank you for listening.
If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.